I'm Lauren from RDU on Stage, and I'm sitting with Judy Dove, who is the director of the Forest Moon upcoming production called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which opens in February. And I'm thrilled that Sheldon Bleiweiss also was able to join us. He is the child of two Holocaust survivors and part of the Holocaust Speakers Bureau for the Center of Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education. Teaches classes at NC State and Duke for the Osher Lifelong Learning Center, and speaks around the Triangle area on the Holocaust. Thank you both so much for joining me. When we think, and I'll throw this out there for both of you, when we think of Holocaust stories, particularly Holocaust stories having to do with children, we think of Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, which has been adapted for the stage and for film so many times. But this story is a little bit different because this is inspired by stories and poems written by children inside Terezin, one of the camps. So can you tell me a little bit, Judy, I guess, about the background of the play?
All right, well, one of the things that I learned when I was researching the play was that a concentration camp, there are different kinds. Some were detainment camps, and some were extermination camps. Terezin, which was north of Prague, was a detainment camp where they held prisoners until they were sent to Auschwitz to be killed. And this particular camp was known for, it was like a show camp. They sent a lot of musicians and artists, very talented arts people to this camp. And when the Red Cross had an inspection to see what conditions were like for the prisoners, these prisoners were made to give performances, concerts, do artwork to show that things were very nice, which they were. Immediately after the performances, I think one of which was filmed for a propaganda film, they were sent off to Auschwitz and destroyed. And so one of the bittersweet things of the art that came out of it, in particular Brundebar, the opera, was that the cast members were constantly being replenished. But you're asking me about the particular poems and drawings from which this play was drawn. One of the things that happened in the camp, education was not allowed, but games were allowed, and children were able, because one of the teachers was able to save scraps of paper, the backs of labels, receipts, whatever, and they were able to make drawings and to write poetry. And she hid these poems and drawings in a leather suitcase that was buried. And years later, it was discovered, and so all of these children who had long since been sent to Auschwitz, their observations and their thoughts were revealed through their art. And so a book was created, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which is the title of one of the poems. And from that, Celeste Rasponti wrote a play.
How many children were in this particular camp? And how many, do we know how many survived?
Would you like to take that?
In total, about a million and a half children were killed by the Nazis. In Terezin, about 15,000 children passed through, 10% survived.
There's a famous photograph taken in 1945 of children pictured behind a barbed wire fence in Auschwitz. They're wearing their striped uniforms. It's a famous photograph, so people can Google it, look it up. What do we know outside of these poems and stories that were left for us? What do we know about the children's experience in this camp?
Shelley,
Or in any of the camps.
In
your
any
parents
case.
were survivors.
Well,
so-
my parents were teenagers when the war broke out. Children's experiences varied from camp to camp. I should say that there were a total of 42,500 ghettos and concentration camps throughout Nazi-occupied Europe. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing a camp. Children were hidden like Anne Frank. Children were sent to England to survive in the kinder transport. Children that might have been the picture you referred to in Auschwitz, many of the children in Auschwitz became experiments with Dr. Mengele and some of the other medical professionals in Auschwitz. Those children that the picture is of most likely may have come from terrorism, because oftentimes when children came to the death camps, there were 6 death camps out of the 42,000. When they came to the death camps, they were often just killed right away because there was no use for them. They could not produce it. They could not labor. They could not work. Towards the end of the war, 44, 45, they might have been brought in and kept in family camps and not necessarily killed at once. And so those children that survived, we don't really know all their stories. Some have survived and written their stories and told their stories. I'm not familiar with all of them. So the experiences varied from camp to camp.
And you mentioned you're the oldest child of 2 Holocaust survivors. They were teenagers, you said. Did they talk a lot to you about their experience? What was their experience? And
Well, both of my parents survived independently using fake identities. They survived in the open. My dad became a Polish laborer. My mother actually became a Polish laborer as well. She wound up working in Germany. And my dad, they met actually when my mother got deported to my father's hometown. And they fell in love, but then went their separate ways to survive. And then towards the end of the war, my father was discovered by the Allied Army. He had been sent to repair a bridge where the mortality rate was 100%. He survived. The Allies found him. My dad knew 5 languages. They made him an interpreter. And after the war, he found my mother again, and they got married and came over to the United States. They didn't talk a lot when I was growing up. Post-traumatic stress disorder was very common among the survivors. And there were a lot of nightmares. Because my parents were not in camps, their nightmares were different. But my mother cried every day, thinking about the family that she had lost. My father lost his parents, his sister and his brother. My mother lost her parents and her brother. Her sister survived. So I knew that I had lost that family, but I did not know the details until I got to be an adult later on. So just something it was too painful for them to talk about. They didn't want to cause us any pain. So they didn't talk, and we didn't ask the questions. So in the 70s, my mother started talking to public schools, and that's when I started beginning to hear the stories, and we're able to kind of get the information. So it wasn't until probably I was in my 20s and 30s.
I first became familiar with the collection of stories and poems found in this suitcase. I was 10 years old in Sunday school at Temple Beth Am, and it was so haunting to me that today I could literally recite by heart the poem, I Never Saw Another Butterfly. We learned a song inspired by it, and it stuck with me for 40 years. In the show marketing materials, it says that this is appropriate for the whole family. What age group is this specifically geared towards, would you say?
Well, I think because of the emotional impact that this play will have, I think that really like 5th, 6th grade, I'd feel more comfortable with 6th grade and up. However, it's parents' discretion. I think it's a story that everybody needs to have. It's not so much graphic as it is very emotionally intense. And it is a large part of the play is made up of the poetry that was written by the children, some of which is very sad. A lot of it is talking about looking for their parents and not being able to see them again, and what the first thing that they'll do when they finally get home again, most of which never did get home again. There are stories about relationships that are formed and then torn apart. And so that's sort of emotional impact. But so I think it's really up to the parent as far as what they feel is appropriate for their child to see. The stories certainly, I mean, I remember being shown documentaries on those reel-to-reel tapes in my little 4-room schoolhouse back at the Old Hills School in Mingo Junction, Ohio. And that school only went up to 4th grade. And I remember seeing very graphic depictions of the Holocaust in those documentaries. It was good for me to know. I was aware. It, you know, didn't, and we're not showing any pictures of things like that. It's all the words and memories of children. I think certainly anytime anybody goes to see this, the parent should have a talk with the child and let them know about it. But it's a part of history. It happened. It's happening. You know, it's not the only place that, you know, there's heartbreak and terror. And I think that personally, as a child, I was appreciative that I knew that these things existed. You know, it's not something I had to be exposed to regularly, but being told and being able to make decisions for myself, that was important to me.
And me too. I mean, like I said, I when I was trying to put together my own timeline, I would say I was about 10 when I was introduced to this. Sheldon, you speak to school groups, you teach senior citizens at the Osher Center, which we mentioned, at the Osher Center for Lifelong Learning at Duke and NC State. At what age can parents start talking with their children about the Holocaust? And are there any primers or tips for parents who might be coming to see this show that they can either use to talk to their children about this, either before the production or after the show?
I'm going to echo what Judy said about the age group and so on. When I was a docent at the Holocaust Museum in Houston, we often frowned on giving tours to kids that were under 6th grade because we didn't because of what the museum depicted and what the museum showed. We didn't feel that children that were under 6th grade would have the abstract ability to grasp what was happening. We had tours where there were younger children in there, but they got bored. It was not something that they were interested in. This is not the kind of play that's going to grab their excitement. But I think that the theme of the Holocaust, or the message that we try to get across when we educate, is how do you treat someone who is different, who is not like you? The society at the time in Nazi Germany was an us versus them society. It did not start with gas chambers. It started with how people regarded somebody who was not Aryan, who was different. The same message applies today. An us versus them mentality. Those people over there are different. They need to be treated different. They're not like us. That's a message any parent should be able to teach their child. Prejudice is not born. You're not born with prejudice. You are taught that. Rogers and Hammerstein did a beautiful job of doing that in South Pacific. So I think parents need to begin talking to the kids as early as they go into school of how do they treat somebody who might be different. There was a story I just saw in the paper of a 10-year-old boy who killed himself because he had a colostomy bag and he was getting teased at school and bullied. Parents should be teaching their kids not to do that. They should be teaching them how to, we're all human beings. We all live by supposed to live by a golden rule. And I think that's what parents can teach. So if they're going to come to the play, I think they need to be looking at the fact that these children were treated differently because they happen to be Jewish or not Aryan. And I think for parents to begin getting that message to their kids of this is what happened to someone your age because they were different. They were not like not like the others. How do you treat somebody who's not like that? And that can go down as kindergarten. That can go in first, second grade. They should be learning those lessons.
Sunday is the anniversary of the 1945 liberation of Auschwitz, and it's also International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Why is it important to share stories like I Never Saw Another Butterfly, and what is the relevance of the Holocaust today? You kind of touched on it, but...
I think the continued relevance has to do with people who were, during the time, people chose what they were going to do. They chose whether they were going to be a perpetrator like the Nazis. They chose whether they were going to stand by and do nothing, or they chose to help out, or they chose to rescue. It was, a lot of people say, well, God had something to do with it. No, I don't believe that. It was people who made the choice. They were average citizens. They were not evil. They did evil things, but they were average human beings. To continue remembering what happened to a group of people who were eventually killed because they happened to represent a particular ethnic group was wrong. And I think that's the continued lesson that we need to keep teaching this. The same thing I talked about. How do you regard the person who is not like you? It should not matter what their religion is, how they believe in God, if they even believe in God. It shouldn't matter what their gender is, their skin color, their culture, who they love, where they're from. That shouldn't matter. We're all human beings. And we need to learn to tolerate the differences and respect that.
On last year's Holocaust Remembrance Day, the White House issued a statement to commemorate the day in which they failed to make any mention of Jews, Judaism, or anti-Semitism behind the genocide. And that sparked a conversation about Holocaust denial. I don't want to get too political in this morning broadcast, but in your speaking about the Holocaust in recent years, has there been anything that has changed about the conversation or the dialogue or anything that has surprised you?
Well, I think we're seeing an increase in the number of hate crimes. We're seeing an increase in the number of hate groups in this country. There's over 954 hate groups in this country. 2/3 of them support a white supremacist ideology. They feel emboldened because of things that have happened in the past couple of years. We're seeing a tremendous increase in anti-Semitic incidents. We know just happened in October, the 11 people that were killed in Pittsburgh, just again because they were Jewish. The Charleston shooting, because of who they were. We're seeing an increase in that. I don't see the leadership in our country condemning it like they had been in the past. And I think that's opening up the door. If you don't condemn it, it opens the door for people to say, guess what, we can get away with it. And I think that's the tragedy.
And a lot of the beginnings of the Holocaust were born out of the idea of separating families, and a little bit. And those are conversations we're still having today, now.
Well, one of the things the Nazis realized is that family was very important to Jews. And they were able to manipulate and control a lot of things by saying to somebody, if you don't cooperate with us, we're going to go after your family. And they didn't hesitate once they got to the camps to separate families. They didn't hesitate to separate men and women. And when they got to that separation point, if a mother wanted to stay with her child, she went with the child to their death. Or sometimes parents were told, which child do you want to have live? Which child do you want to have killed? Exemplified in Sophie's Choice, that movie. So yes, family was strong. They used that, but didn't hesitate to separate families whatsoever. and to incarcerate families, to incarcerate children, yes, we're seeing the same thing. It's not new. It's happened before. So it's, yeah. Right.
Well, and maybe if we learn from history, we can.
We hope to learn from history. The idea is that if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And I think that's one of the reasons we also teach the Holocaust, or have plays like I Never Saw Another Butterfly, to educate people on what happened, and we don't want it to happen again. And if we are not careful, we can lose our rights, we can lose our freedoms, and we have to be careful. We're already seeing laws passed against certain individuals because of who they are. For example, not being able to serve in the military.
Are there any events surrounding, or any events commemorating the International Day of Remembrance here in Raleigh that people can find out more about?
I don't know of any particular events around that. The events that are going to take place are in the spring, where there's a special day called Holocaust Memorial Day, which is usually in April. And there's a state commemoration that's going to be April 14th at Temple Beth Or in Raleigh. And there's going to be a commemoration on May 5th in Chapel Hill. And we're going to have survivors speak, and we light candles in memory of the 6 million. And we also honor the survivors and honor the liberators and recognize other genocides.
You know, one of the things in doing this play people who know me know that two of my passions are the arts and languages. And when I first became familiar with this play, there's a passage near the beginning of the play that just strikes me. It's a voice just reading off statistics, reading the names and ages of children who perished at, who were sent from Terezin and perished at Auschwitz. And one of the things that I really want to do in this play is to restore personalities to people who have become nothing but hollow statistics at this point, because they were living and breathing and laughing and loving just like all of us. One of the ways that I'm trying to do that, we've been very diligent about trying to get the correct pronunciation of names. And it may seem like a small thing, but when you think of a baby being born into a family, and like you were saying, family is so important. When you give that child a name, that is so special. And you see it on paper, and a lot of these names, they don't look like anything that we've ever seen. I remember one in particular, it's spelled J-I-R-I in the play. And we were wondering, is it Yuri, is it Jiri? And fortunately, two of our actors, our young actors, come from families who are Polish and who speak Polish in the family. And so they've been kind of our experts in some of the Polish names. And and then of course I've got a Czech background, and floating around in my head are the names and phrases that my father and aunts used to talk about. And so we put our resources together, and Craig Johnson, our stage manager, is just wonderful at researching, and we found that this name is actually pronounced Jiří, and that was so different from anything that we had thought, but it was so beautiful, and all of a sudden it just came to life for me, and I could just picture his family saying, Jiří, come here, I need some help with this, Jiří, and saying it with love, Jiří. Names like Raya, Irena, Honza, Pavel, they're names that are so beautiful when they are said the way that they were meant to be said, the way they were meant to be pronounced. And also one of the things that, in addition, there's a big part in the play that has to do with the music that was created, the opera that the children had to perform in. It was called Brundebar, and in the play, Celeste Raspanti explains that she changed it to Ludwig because of possible copyright, problems but it was based on that same thing and all the experiences that the children went through in producing this opera. They're based on Brundabar. So one of the really exciting things that has happened is through our research, we were able to find a recording, it's out of Holland, of the actual music, the actual Brundabar score that was composed by Hans Krasse. And he is one of the prisoners. He had written this score prior to the war. It was for some contest that fell apart because of all the happenings that, you know, tore everything apart. But he brought the score with him and adapted that with the children to create the opera. But you're going to hear some of that music. We got the rights to use a portion of the music in our show. And so when you hear the music that is played as the children reenact a part of the story, you're going to be hearing the actual composition that was written by Hans Krasse, who after the production, after I believe it's the propaganda film, was sent to Auschwitz with the rest of the children and killed. So it's important to me to be able to gather bits and pieces. It reminds me a little bit of the movie Gorky Park, that old movie where there were bodies that were found without their faces. And they went through this process to reconstruct the faces to give these people back their identities. And in some sort of way, we're trying to do that, to hear how was their name really pronounced? What were they really feeling? What did they go through? What were they thinking? You know, and so through the music and the poems and the artwork and all, we're hoping to restore some personalities back.
Well, and it gives an authenticity. All the research, the music, the pronunciation of names gives an authenticity to the work, which is really important in a piece like this.
And I think it shows respect. And it's something that I can say for my cast. They have tackled this play with the utmost respect and love. Such a dedicated cast, and most of them are, I mean, we have kids from middle school on up. Our oldest cast member, I believe, is in her 70s, and then we have children who are in middle school. So there's a wide range of ages here. But every single person has treated this with such love and respect. And
what do you hope the takeaway of this show will be?
Well, I think I'm going to probably echo a lot of things that we've already said, but part of it is letting people know that these people lived, that they were real, that they went through this, and that they're like us. The experiences that you're going to see and experience in this play, you'll recognize them as feelings that, you know, we all have. And by doing that, you know, hoping to break down the idea that some people are different, because we're people, we're human beings. We all hurt, we all love, we all laugh, we all have rights, the same rights. And I'm hoping that will come through. And then again, very important, these children had their voices taken away from them. And there's no way that you can ever really give them back, but somehow by sharing with you the actual words that they wrote, the music that they listened to, the thoughts that they had, the fears, the hopes, somehow maybe just in a very tiny way, letting them speak.
I think for me, I would like to see the play be a springboard for discussions that families can have with children about, again, what can happen with somebody who is not like you. So even if they don't do anything before the play, after seeing the play, I would hope it prompts some more discussion or some more wanting to learn more about what happened.
Will there be talk back? I didn't see on your website, and maybe this hasn't been decided yet because it's still a few weeks
It's
away.
in process.
Yes, there's going to be a talk back, and Sheldon is going to be, we just need to determine the date, and that is in process. We are having a production meeting today, and much of that will probably be decided then.
So people can go on the Forest Moon Theater website. I will put the link on our Facebook page, and I will put the link on the RDU on Stage page, and people can follow up and
Right.
see when those conversations are going to take place.
Exactly.
The other thing I'll add to it is that definitely encourage students to go back to their schools and their teachers and say, you know, I just saw this play. I'd like to learn more. Why is there any way we can bring something into the school, whether it's someone like me to speak or maybe segments, you know, some of the poetry, because a play like this with poems and artwork can easily be brought into a language class or a language arts class or an English class, even an art class. Because I've spoken to middle school students and high school students. So all it takes is students saying to their teacher, we want to hear more.
It kind of related to that, because the idea of children's art as a way of expressing what they were going through was so important. We've invited some schools and youth performance groups to perform prior to each performance. That schedule will be published very soon, but the shows start, well, in the evenings they start, we perform February 8th, 9th, and 10th, so on Fridays and then 15, 16, and 17. So on the Fridays and Saturdays, the shows start at 7:30, but at 7 o'clock, there will be a group of students from a community group or a school who will be performing either instrumental or vocal music, and that, you know, to kind of, again, bridge that gap between then and now. So get there early. And something else, you know, there are some books that you may want to get to read with your children. Hannah's Suitcase is one. There is a book, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which it's been brought to my attention that it's out of print, but there are still copies on Amazon. And you know, there is a bookstore right next door to the Wake Forest Renaissance Center, page 158 books. They could help you find books that are appropriate for your child if you want to continue the discussion.
Judy, can you close us out with a few lines or a little excerpt from the
Sure.
poem?
You know, I'll read a few lines from the poem that is actually the title of the play. So this is one of the poems that was found in the suitcase. I never saw another butterfly, the last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzling yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears sing against a white stone, such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. And there's a lot more. Much of the play is made up of the poems, so we've got a little puppetry in there too. So there's a lot of really nice things that I think will enrich the play.
And I think one of the other comments I'm going to make is, even if you the poems or if you read the Diary of Anne Frank, the optimism that you see in their writings is incredible, knowing what they went through. And I think that's the other thing that this is, like I said, there's no graphic stuff. It's not, it's emotional, but it's not something you shouldn't see. And so I think children could easily read the poems, or parents could read the poems to the children. Look at the diaries. There are other diaries besides Anne Frank that have surfaced recently, and it is the optimism that they express. Even in hiding, Anne Frank was optimistic. I never saw another butterfly. It's not that depressing, it is optimistic.
There's a lot of hope.
And I think even they may not have known what was going to happen, or if they saw their friends getting carted away to a camp, there's still the optimism and the hope. You never give up the hope.
Well, as you mentioned, Judy, I Never Saw Another Butterfly opens February 8th and runs through the 17th at the Wake
Forest Renaissance
Renaissance
Center.
Center in Wake Forest. And people can go on the Forest Moon website to find out more.
Right. The curtain, again, on Fridays and Saturdays is 7:30 and 3 o'clock on Sundays. But, be sure to get there early so you can hear some of the student performances.
Thank you so much, both of you,
Thank
for
you.
joining
Thank
me.
you.